all of this need to get ahead, which is the basis of life, at least as it seems to us from one perspective, is critique. It is conditions for happiness. And so we're not saying to stop these things because there's a biological need for them, but we're saying to maintain our awareness inside of them. And the mind also loves to analyze. So anytime we analyze a situation, each time to understand it, each time we critique it, each time we have a condition, we get lost in the mind. So that means we remove our happiness. Happiness comes from the expansion. It's the emptiness. It's the empty container. We think, we're brought up and we're bringing our children up to believe that we need content to be happy. We need someone else or some situation, or we need to get a good grade, or we need to get the praise. And in the truth, the actual truth is it's the opposite of that. It comes from the emptiness. It comes from the cessation of seeking. So even people in spirituality can get stuck in this paradigm where they're trying to achieve something, and then they're kissing the present moment goodbye. The emptiness of the present moment where no thoughts exist, where no concepts exist. So how do we access this? Well, we allow whatever is arising in this moment to arise in this moment. It's already arising. Why are we fighting against it? We just let it happen. Let whatever is happening happen. And we see any fear comes up, we allow that fear, we thank that fear. But the fear can tell you, well, this is nonsense. Don't listen to this video, or don't surrender to such a full extent. So why are we surrendering? Well, each moment that we argue with what is happening, there's a contraction. So that happiness we talked about, we lose just a little bit of it, or a lot of it, depending on how much we contract, how much we disallow the fear, or get stuck in those critiques or needs for change. And so each moment we try to fit what is happening with what we know, infer, or prefer. We're trying to guide the future instead of surrender to it, to fully surrender to whatever this moment is bringing us. And so then we have a desire that arises. We want to get something. We think, oh, this will get me something. I'm willing to do it. But how much fear can we actually embrace? And how slow can we go? Because knowing, or speeding up, or racing, or trying to achieve, or grab something, it's a subtle form of critique or contraction of the formless. So in the formlessness, we don't mentally know anything. The knowing comes from being spontaneous, being connected. So then goals, what we're teaching our kids and what we're driving ourselves, are also signaling that this moment is insufficient, that we need to get somewhere else. So whether we critique, have a preference or an inference, if we identify with the thought, we lose ourselves as awareness itself. So particular moments to catch yourself is when there's a critique, a preference, an inference, a fear. That's when we can say, oh, I'm identifying with thought. So when we spot a critique, a preference, or an inference, first let's realize, these are the moments where I'm most likely to get lured into the mind. And I'm grateful. The mind is trying to look out for me. I thank you for sharing, but I return to this moment. To be awareness is to be at peace. Now, we may not be able to achieve this pure container state, but the more we can allow this in, the happier we will be. And so perhaps there's different levels of happiness, just as there are different levels of sadness. But for those of us who are in life and so attached to conditions or getting stuck in the mind, anything would be an improvement. So why do we accept things? Well, it's already happening, regardless of whether you approve it or not. And this is sort of the myth of the mind, which gets us so tied to the mind, is, oh, I have to reject what is happening right now. But it's okay. If the mind is rejecting what's happening right now, we allow it to take control and reject. See, this is all about being ultimately permissive, allowing. Awareness allows whatever is happening. So even if the mind says, oh, we're going a little too far, or I just can't accept this situation, or I need these things to change, if we allow that, then there's no contraction, or there's less of a contraction. So to be aware is to be at peace, not judging, not criticizing. It is to be the container that allows whatever is happening to happen. And since your true self, that is the self beyond the mind, is the container, it feels great to be more deeply attuned. And so we crave that, but again, this is another condition of the craving. The reason we crave it is because when we're lost in thought, we're contracted, and we don't want to be contracted anymore. So the contraction doesn't feel good. And so what happens is when we reject that contraction, when we reject that bad feeling, the mind feels the prompt to argue with itself. And so we get sucked deeper and deeper into the mind. And the argument that the mind is having with itself is compelling intentionally to get you away from whatever it was that you were going toward. It's trying to not wake you up, but put you to sleep. It's trying to yank you back into the world of conditions. So we identify with that argument. We fall in love with it. And it's fine. If that's what's happening, that's fine. This is about allowing and allowing and allowing. So the idea is perhaps we can keep the love without the identification. So if we're actively allowing, it's ironical, and you see this in a mature relationship, right? If you're in a mature relationship with somebody, you are less about protecting yourself and more about how they are feeling. But you don't identify. In other words, it's a tricky thing, right? Because you're fully empathetic towards the other person, or it's a child. You're fully empathetic, and yet you need to have a little bit of well, that's the question. How much, I'm sorry, I was just pondering it. How much identification do you want to surrender? When you merge with another person, if it's an immature relationship, then if they're unhappy, they're suffering, you are pulled into that. So the question is, can you be so deeply attuned to that child or that partner, but at the same time realize that you are awareness itself? And so, how deeply can we go with that? That is a question, but it's an interesting one to think about. But what allows us to go to those unfamiliar places where we are empathetically connected, where we are patient with ourselves and others, we allow the fear, but we keep investigating that unknown mystery, that kind of roll of the dice. And that's what I'm going to talk about next. So if we're having a thought about how great we are, or we're having some uncertainty, insecurity about how great or terrible we are, or how the world is, these are the two kind of times where we're most likely to get sucked into the mind. And if we're sucked into the mind, it's fine. It's fine. But we're trying to just be a little more aware, right? Because if we get totally lured into and identified with the thought about how great we are, we actually get identified with the mind, and then we get identified with conditions which we need to chase. Or if we get obsessed with get rid of uncertainty or insecurity, we're going to be too controlling. So the idea is to allow ourselves not to be great, to allow ourselves to be out of control, to be insecure. We model that for our children, we model that for our partners, we model it for ourselves. And then I talked about uncertainty about what's going to happen. It's assumed to be a commentary on how great or terrible we are. We think, oh, if this happens to me, then I'm not a great person, or I'm a terrible person. So we're just allowing the events to unfold as they are, and it doesn't have to be a commentary on who we are, because we're pure emptiness anyway. We're pure awareness. We allow. We are the allowing. Or if we move beyond identification, we start falling in love and identifying with some wonderful idea or model. And so that's where the critique may come in and just give us a little tweak and pull us out of that. Sort of let the wind out of our sails or the air out of the balloon. It's fine. We allow it. We thank it. That is what the useful function of critique or fear is. It lets us be ready for things when we're ready for them, and it's fine. And so with children, we're not going to rush them to get to where we are. They need to slowly go away from the mother. And we talk about this in the continuum concept videos early on. But that idea of letting fear be okay, letting anger be okay, and it's because ideas and models can be a trap. Because we're addicted to thought, and we're not trying to make this bad, but how do we break an addiction? Well, same as Alcoholics Anonymous, you have to first admit that you have a problem. But again, not calling it a problem, so I'm going to tweak this a little bit. It's not a problem that we're addicted to thought, but it's an opportunity for us to wake up from that addiction by being aware that we have the addiction. So we can call it a problem, but no without judgment. It's just somewhere where we're awareness of it. So, and then seeing we're powerless to control. We all want to have power, especially of our thoughts, and yet we know we don't have control of them because random thoughts come in all the time. So the more we can be powerless in the face of our thoughts, and that doesn't mean action like violent or whatever. It just means we allow the thoughts to come up. We allow any critique we have of a child or a partner to come up. We thank it for sharing, but we know that no thought is true. And then we don't need to control these things called thoughts, because they're not actually true. And this idea of summoning a higher power, even a higher self, can be very useful. but we don't want to create some models that are going to restrict us, some images or contextualization, which I think religions sometimes tend to go there, and spiral dynamics, Ken Wilber tends to go there. So that's where acceptance and humility comes in. So we realize that the infinite is beyond us, the deeper sense, or the uncertainty of the future, or what the child's going to do. All these things, the more we can go into powerlessness, the more we can go into humility and acceptance, the better off we're going to be. And so then gratitude for no reason. I don't know if that's an AA thing, but I think it's really useful to keep that attitude. We don't need a reason for why we're grateful, or an object like, oh, I'm grateful to this kind of religious structure, or this being, or this person. It's just gratitude for itself, for it being the way it is.